Our department head, Professor Barbara Kosta, who received her PhD from Berkeley and has published widely books and articles on topics ranging from Weimar years to the present. And her most recent book, and this is of course pertinent to tonight's presentation, is called Willing Seduction, the Blue Angel Marlene Dietrich, Mass Culture. And so in connection with that, she'll be talking to us tonight about the marketability of Marlene Dietrich in post-war Germany. So I'd like to present my colleague, Barbara Kosta.
The title of my talk, The Marketability of Marlene Dietrich in Post-War Germany, suggests that Marlene Dietrich has developed a new kind of symbolic value since German unification. And that's something that I'm going to be exploring in this talk, to ask what narratives does Marlene Dietrich provide the newly unified Germany, and particularly the newly unified Berlin. As most of you know, Berlin became the capital of the new Germany, and it was a city that was really struggling to define itself in this post-war era. So I think that Marlene Dietrich's death, in a way, in 1992 provided kind of a wealth of narratives for helping the new Berlin discover and define itself. Now, Marlene Dietrich used to be a household name, as many of you know. Not so much anymore. When I ask my students who Marlene Dietrich is, many of them don't even know. So I have to promise them by the end of taking my class, they will. For Berlin, though, she is definitely a household name. And her life nearly spanned the 20th century. She was born in 1901 and died in 1992. She was born in Berlin and died in France. She was an icon of glamour, a trendsetter, a cosmopolitan, a film star, a chanteuse, a Hausfrau, something she was very proud of, a mother, a grandmother, a great cook, a loyal friend, and a lover of many, both men and women. She played in about 50 films, and as she put it, she has been photographed literally to death. When Dietrich retreated from public view, many people were reminded of Greta Garbo's retreat. But in contrast to Greta Garbo, who left filmmaking at the age of 36, Dietrich performed until the age of 75. So in a way, it wasn't purely vanity that motivated her removing herself from the public eye. It was instead a very acute awareness of the value of her image and realizing that she had to live off this image for the rest of her days. It was an image that she had cultivated very meticulously, an image that she, in a way, constructed. And she was, if you read about her preparation for performances, it was really phenomenal, her attention to detail. Once she arrived in Hollywood, her performances became more stylized, and her awareness of the detail of her performance became even almost like a hyper concern of hers. For example, in the film, The Devil is a Woman, she painstakingly drew the arch of her eyebrows until she thought it was the perfect image. In Kismet, another Hollywood film, she had her entire body painted in gold. And she learned lighting from Joseph von Sternberg. She understood that if she were lit in a certain way, that it would really accentuate her cheekbones. And any set that she went to, despite what the director said of the lighting, she would go and change everything so that she would be lit in the most appealing way. When she withdrew from the public eye, Maximilian Schell, a very well-known German actor, and actually I think he's Austrian, and filmmaker, asked Dietrich in 1982 whether he could film her and provide testimony, her own testimony, to her own career. She was living in Paris at the time, in the Avenue Montaigu, number 12. There's a plaque there if you ever have a chance to go and visit. And she told Maximilian Schell that he could only interview her. He would not be able to bring his camera into her apartment and take pictures of her. So in this very fascinating documentary of Marlene Dietrich, you will hear, I mean, it's really the result of a fascinated interviewer and a contentious struggle. Constantly, he tried to persuade her, please let me take a picture of you and include it, which she adamantly refused to do. Now, Dietrich's discipline, she was always seen as a very disciplined actress, is oftentimes attributed to her Prussian upbringing. And her libertine flair is often attributed to her career in the Weimar Republic. And let's see if I can get to the first. Oh yes, I have some here, some wonderful quotes by Dietrich. I'll let you just enjoy that. So her libertine flair was attributed to growing up in during the Weimar Republic, probably one of the most exciting periods in 20th century German history. It was a time of experimentation. It was a time of testing gender boundaries, and Dietrich fit right in there. And despite her many years outside of Germany, Dietrich always considered herself eine Berlinerin, a Berliner. She actually even wrote her autobiography, entitled it Ich bin, Gott sei Dank, Berlinerin, which translated means, I am, thank God, a Berliner. Now, before speaking about the marketability of Dietrich, I thought it would be helpful to kind of provide you with an overview of her life so that you could see what narratives this post-war Germany ended up mining in search for a new identity. Here's Dietrich in some of her various roles. I'm sure some of you can recognize what films they're from. Dietrich began her career in Berlin, 1920s. She was involved in cabaret, in theater, and in film. She played a number of minor roles in many different films during the 1920s. And only around 1929 did she star in two films that were silent at the time. One is A Woman That a Man Longs For, and the other one was I Kiss Your Hand, Madam. Both of these films, if you see them, they're kind of, you can see that there's a certain acting style that Dietrich cultivated, a very aloof, cool acting style that would later then, a year later, fascinate Joseph von Sternberg when he came to Berlin to help the German film industry transition into sound. So here's Dietrich in 1928. She hobnobbed with all of the kind of aspiring cultural icons of the 1920s. And in the middle here is Anna May Wong, actress and Hollywood actress. And then to the right here is Leni Riefenstahl. Here she is in a very famous cabaret performing with Margot Leon. And apparently in this act, they sang a song called When My Best Girlfriend Goes Shopping. And it's all about girlfriends talking about their husbands, but with like a lesbian undertone. And Dietrich actually is said to have brought violets and worn violets and pinned them on her dress, which was a symbol of lesbianism during the 1920s. So always very provocative. You know, she appeared in the 1920s, showed up in pants, of course, which wasn't done. She would wear a smoking, top hats, monocles, kind of always very, not only trendsetter, but very provocative. Many of you may know the film The Blue Angel, which was directed in 1929 by Joseph and Sternberg. And this film actually launched Marlene Dietrich into Hollywood stardom. Von Sternberg came, as I mentioned, from Hollywood and helped Germany transition into sound film. Dietrich was really an unknown actor at the time. And it's said that he, you know, kind of scoured Berlin looking for the perfect Lola Lola for this film. And he found her, obviously, in Marlene Dietrich. The male actor, Emil Jannings, was in Hollywood. German actor was in Hollywood, and as a little footnote, he was the first actor to receive an Oscar in the 1920s. But his English was so bad that when sound came around, he left and returned to Germany. Now, he did not he was not really enthusiastic about the casting of Marlene Dietrich. In fact, it is said that he really hated her. And in the strangling scene, he actually tried to strangle her. You know, to add insult to injury, on the marquee, you know, where his name was supposed to be really big as the lead star, he kind of got displaced, and Marlene Dietrich's name went up on the marquee. So I'm going to just show a very short clip here. This is a very famous seduction scene. This is he's shipwrecking here in this scene. With the siren, it's kind of a play on the classical. Okay. It does not end well for him, for those of you who did not see the film. Right. On the night of the premiere of The Blue Angel, Marlene Dietrich left for Hollywood and signed a 5-year contract with Paramount Studios. She made 7 films with von Sternberg, and then slowly realized that she needed to kind of, untie herself from him and branch out and make films with other directors. She was in Hollywood. She was noted. I mean, she was the classic vamp. And by 1937, interestingly, she became, with Katharine Hepburn and other female actors, box office poison. She was no longer attractive to that female prototype was no longer sought out in Hollywood. While she was in Hollywood during this time period, you can imagine that, you know, the Nazis, Goebbels, wanted to recruit Dietrich to return to Berlin and become the star of the Nazi cinema. And Dietrich, very political and very anti-fascist, refused Goebbels and did not enter Germany again until 1945 in American uniform, which did not go over very well. I'll get to that in a moment. And also, she gave up her German citizenship in 1939 and took American citizenship. She worked, these are some of the Hollywood films. Let me just quickly show you before. This is The Blonde Venus. The previous one was Kismet. This one is also The Blonde Venus. Shanghai Express. These are the films that she made with von Sternberg. So, as I mentioned, she gave up her German citizenship, and in 1940, she was very active during the war and promoting the war effort against the Nazis. In 1941, she raised war bonds and entered Germany with Generals Gavin and Patton, and to look for her mother, who stayed in Germany during the war. She also worked for the USO and went on tour. And she went into areas that most actors did not go into, to perform for the troops, in very remote, kind of dangerous areas. She received in 1947 the Medal of Freedom from the Americans and the Medal of Liberté from the French government. Here you see her. Just as a little side note, I went once, her grandson was here in Tucson at, I forget where it was, but he was talking about a documentary that he had made about Marlene Dietrich. And there was somebody in the audience, and the grandson was saying that this period in her life was the most significant for her. And it was very difficult for her to transition out of this period and gain footing again. And someone in the audience actually had met her and sent a book that he had written, his memoir, and he mentioned her. And that man that mentioned her was in the audience. And he said one day, the phone rang in his house in his apartment in Tucson, and his wife answered it and said, Marvin, Dietrich's on the phone, wants to talk to you. Apparently in that time where she was a recluse in Paris, she was always calling people. That was her main form of communication. She was thrilled that he had sent a book that she's noted in there, and that he said that he was one of her boys. And this was this was a very significant time in her life, And she was very loyal to the American troops. In the 1950s, when she began making films again, it's kind of like the irony of history. She was asked to play the roles of Nazis. Billy Wilder, in A Foreign Affair, recruited her to play a kind of a cabaret singer in a club. And she at first refused because she was an anti-fascist. She didn't want anything to do with the Nazis. But the directors Wilder and Kramer then convinced her that this was very important, these roles, and to bring, kind of these stories to the American public. So she conceded and played in, here's Judgment at Nuremberg, A Foreign Affair. So during the 1950s and into the 60s, she played in a number of films. Some of you may also know Touch of Evil by Orson Welles. Destry Rides Again. Destry Rides Again. That was a little earlier than that. But she also then started to sing and went on tour as a chanteuse. She sang in Las Vegas and actually toured the world as a singer. She worked a lot with Burt Bacharach. He accompanied her and went on tour with her. And then she returned to Berlin in 1961 to perform. And she was met with a great ambivalence. Part of the audience called her a traitor and told her to leave Germany, go back home, threw tomatoes at her. And of course, some were very happy to have her, but the overall reception was incredibly ambivalent. So after 1961, as I said, she never really returned to Berlin to perform. But as I said before, she considered herself first and foremost a Berliner. And she watched the fall of the Berlin Wall. This is an image of her Berlin tour. She watched the fall of the Berlin Wall from her Paris apartment as a recluse, and she called the French radio and asked them to please play her song, Ich habe einen Koffer in Berlin, which means I have a suitcase in Berlin. It's a very famous song of hers. And they conceded. She also was very active in trying to promote the fall, I mean, not the fall of the wall, but kind of this post-wall Germany, and enlisted a lot of her friends and contacts to talk about the new post-wall Germany. In 1992, as I mentioned, she died, and she was buried in Berlin. And here is her gravestone here. I think it's very symbolic almost that, it's only, her first name, and everybody knows who it is on her gravestone, Marlene. Now, surprisingly, when it was decided that she would be buried in Berlin, again, the reception was very ambivalent. Many people did not accept that she was going to be buried there, and there was actually quite a furor, trying to stop that. And a gala that was organized in her honor was actually canceled. So, one of the questions is, why in 1992, post-wall, was there still this extraordinary ambivalence? And one, I think, in the newspapers they talked about the return of the Blue Angel. But in a way, I think that the return of Marlene Dietrich also challenged post-war sentiments. They were still there, that notion of Germany's inability to mourn. Germany's not facing its the atrocities that were committed in Germany's name during the war were still very much unresolved. And Dietrich's return, in a way, opened all of that discussion up again, even in this post-war moment, which for some was also a moment of crisis. On Dietrich's 100th anniversary, so basically 8 years after her death, she was finally made an honorary citizen of Berlin. And in the context, and the Senator of Culture in Berlin said that, quote, her burial in Berlin would be understood as a sign that the despotic fascist regime and the unnatural division of the city of her birth have been overcome. So her return symbolically, and the acceptance of her return, became a symbol of a Germany that finally could reconcile itself with its past. Now, the debates about what to do with Dietrich, posthumously in Berlin, continued and had very many different forms, or very many different articulations. There was a heated debate in 1996 about to name a street after Marlene Dietrich. And in Schöneberg, which was kind of the borough that she was born in, And it was a very contentious debate. And finally, a street was selected, which was in an industrial area, very remote, and, you know, didn't kind of, a street that did not live up to the name Marlene Dietrich, you know, in terms of her glamour and trend setting. So it was, you know, it was, they didn't do that. And finally, in 2002, they found a place to honor Dietrich. And that was in the Potsdamer Platz, which I think, again, very symbolically, is the new heart of Berlin. So they brought their international film star back into the heart of Berlin. This area is significant historically because the wall ran right through here. And for those of you who have been to Berlin, there was what was called the, what's the name now? What's the area, the space in between the walls?
Man's land.
Yeah, it was like a no man's land. I mean, basically it was only rabbits lived there, the inhabitants. So this becomes very symbolic as a space. First of all, as I said, it's the heart of the new Berlin, and it's the place that the 1920s, it was the hub of modernity. And then dissected by the wall between East and West. So historically, it's as I said, it's a very rich, has a very rich past. Also 1925, the first traffic light in Europe was installed here on the Potsdamer Platz. So naming this after Dietrich was really a tribute to kind of this reconciliation. And at the same time, here at this Potsdamer Platz is the film museum is here. And the city of Berlin in 1993 bought the whole Dietrich collection, which was, I mean, it was a phenomenally huge collection of Dietrich's belongings. Oh, hang on. Okay, I'll come to that in a moment. It's a huge collection of Dietrich's belongings. And, you know, kind of thinking back on that song, A Suitcase in Berlin, in fact, there were 600 suitcases that were brought to Berlin as part of the collection. And among them, 16,000 photographs. And, you know, there's a whole list of what was actually part of that collection. I don't know, like 800 pairs of shoes, you know, I mean, everything, all the ephemera that ever. She even had clips of applause of her shows in this collection. So she began to collect everything. So, I mean, one of the questions then for me is, you know, what part of Dietrich's biography is mined or is, you know, is used in this creation of post-wall Berlin? And I think you can see from, you know, her biography, she lent herself to helping Berlin redefine and kind of emphasize the most positive aspects of its history. I mean, Marlene Dietrich gave the new Berlin an opportunity to revive its 1920s modernity and a time of experimentation because she was so much a part of that. Also, it gave Berlin an anti-fascist icon, very importantly. And also, Germany finally has its international star. Because, you know, Berlin in the 1920s was Hollywood's primary competitor. And Hollywood poached most of, kind of Berlin's talent to compete. So this was, in a way, Germany could finally say, look we are part of the international film scene. We have our star. And what better person to represent that than Marlene Dietrich? So with her collection, just kind of I found this in a magazine, and I thought the trajectory here is so interesting, because this says "Was bleibt," what remains, and it's obviously Marlene Dietrich, and then "Was kommt," and of what is coming is Angela Merkel. So this trajectory between Dietrich and Merkel, kind of Weimar, anti-fascist, and the new German face, in a way. And of course, what better person than to promote fantasy and the imagination. The Marlene Dietrich collection, if you're interested, you can subscribe to its newsletter and become one of the Dietrich fans. It's a very kind of like almost a provincial newsletter, I have to say. It's electronic, but it creates its own little village in a way. And Dietrich's image is constantly on display in Berlin in different variations. So the marketing aspect, for example, here there's a very large department store in Berlin. It's called KaDeWe, Kaufhaus des Westens, which is the department store of the West. And this was an exhibit in that department store. So you can see kind of consumerism and her image, how these are intertwined in Berlin. And all of the paraphernalia and every aspect of her life is again being mined and sold in Berlin. These here are all of her albums that were also displayed in the department store. And then in the the display windows of the department store, they had 3 separate windows depicting different phases of Dietrich's life. So this, for example, this is the department store window, where they're showcasing Dietrich as a commodity because it's in a display window. But at the same time, if you think about it on a more symbolic level, kind of the window as a mirror. And as people walk by, the identity of Dietrich, in a way, mingled with the identity of the passers-by and providing Germany with this new face. Here is another phase during her work with the American troops. And then finally, they have, like I said, all aspects of Dietrich being displayed in Berlin. So this is all of the haute couture that came with the Dietrich collection. And of course, there are a plethora of books now that are being sold throughout Berlin. The streets that Dietrich walked on, the cafes that she went to. There are cafes in her name. So, she's been embraced, as I said, as a commodity. But I think that symbolic value at that point of German unification is really, really, very important as well. And finally, here recently, about 3-4 years ago, I think, a new cookbook, Ich will wat Feinet. It's in a good Berlin dialect. Das Marlene Dietrich Kochbuch. It's the cookbook, and with a very provocative image. She wore an apron when she cooked, by the way. It was I don't think she looked like this. She loved her apron. But so You know, when I look at Dietrich's life story and her return to Berlin, I really see it as a kind of a symbolic comeback. And as I said, you know, she's been used over and over again. The narrative of her life is used over and over again in different medium. A film recently, well, not recently, it was probably about 9 years ago, came out. It's called Marlene Dietrich by the German kind of Heimat filmmaker, Filsmeyer. And he has a scene in there where the character Dietrich is in a hospital, and there's a German soldier wounded. And she walks up to the German soldier and holds his hand in this wonderful melodrama. And, well, first of all, the soldier recognizes Dietrich. And then she walks over and she says, "Maybe we'll get along again one day." Okay. And I think that judging from Dietrich's presence in Berlin, I think that day has really come. So thank you very much.